The rain that night wasn't the kind you drive through. It was the kind that makes you pull over and wait. The kind that turns mountain roads into rivers and fills the ditches so fast you stop trusting where the edge is. I was 20 minutes from home. Visibility was almost nothing. And I had every reason in the world to keep my eyes forward and my foot on the gas. But something moved beside the road. Just a small shape, pressed low against the gravel shoulder, so wet and so still that for a second I thought I'd imagined it. I didn't stop right away. I drove maybe another 30 feet. Then I put the truck in park and sat there in the dark with the rain hammering the roof, asking myself why I was already opening the door. I found it curled beneath the guardrail, soaked completely through. Shaking so hard I could feel it through my jacket the moment I picked it up. It didn't fight me, didn't cry, didn't twist away. It just pressed its face against my chest and went still. I remember thinking, this animal is either exhausted beyond fear, or it knows something I don't. Looking back now, I think it was the second one. My name is Jake. I'm 35. I work remotely from a cabin near the Blue Ridge foothills, graphic design work mostly, the kind that lets you disappear from the world for days at a time if you want to. I live with one dog, a golden retriever named Cooper, who is, without question, the most emotionally available living creature I have ever met. He loves everyone, mailmen, strangers, squirrels, deer. Once he tried to befriend a groundhog for 20 minutes before it gave up and went underground. I had never owned a cat. Never really thought about it. The cabin felt complete with just Cooper and the quiet, and the trees pressing in from every side. That night I brought a small soaking animal inside, and set it on the kitchen floor, and I watched my dog, the animal who had never been intimidated by anything in his entire golden-hearted life, take one look at it and stop moving. Not aggressive, not curious, just frozen, the way prey freezes. And the cat, this tiny half-drowned thing barely bigger than my fist, looked up at Cooper with these flat, wide amber eyes, and held the stare. I laughed a little, nervous, grabbed a towel from the bathroom, wrapped it around the kitten and sat down on the kitchen floor beside the wood stove. Cooper didn't come closer. He sat at the edge of the room all night, watching. The kitten ate a little, not much, warmed up slowly. By midnight it had stopped shaking. I set up a box near the stove with an old flannel shirt inside and assumed it would sleep there. It did not sleep there. Somewhere around 2 in the morning I woke up to something sitting on my chest, 6 inches from my face, staring at me in the dark with those amber eyes like it was running a quiet evaluation. I didn't move for a long moment. It didn't move either. Then it turned around twice and settled just below my chin and went to sleep like that had always been the arrangement. Cooper, from the floor beside the bed, let out a long, slow breath. I understood the feeling. The weeks that followed were strange in ways I couldn't quite name. The kitten grew. Not fast at first, but steadily. And with the growing came things I kept telling myself were normal, just a kitten thing, a personality quirk, nothing unusual. It never meowed, not once, not the soft little sound you'd expect. Instead there was this low, flat, almost mechanical sound in the back of its throat. More like a growl than a call, a sound that felt older than it should have coming from something that small. It ate differently too, hunched low over the bowl, body coiled, eyes scanning the room while it chewed, as if it expected something to try to take the food away. It climbed things no kitten should be able to climb, the top of the refrigerator in the first week, the highest shelf in my office by week 3. Once I found it on top of the doorframe, just sitting there, looking down at me from above like a small, judgmental gargoyle, and it watched everything, visitors, shadows, the tree line through the window, the way the light changed in the afternoon. It watched Cooper sleep with the focused patience of something that had learned a long time ago, that observation was survival. I told myself this was all normal. I told myself that for almost 2 months. Then I took it to the vet. Dr. Harmon had been practicing for over 30 years. She'd seen everything, or she thought she had. She examined the kitten thoroughly, methodically, without saying much. Then she set down her instruments, rested her hands flat on the table, and looked at me over her glasses. "Where exactly," she said slowly, "did you find this animal?" Something in the way she asked it made me go quiet. "Mountain Road," I said. "Why?" She turned back to the kitten. It was sitting perfectly upright on the exam table, watching her with those flat amber eyes, not afraid, not reactive, just watching. "This isn't a domestic cat," she said. She pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen toward me. I stared at the image for a long moment. Then I looked at my kitten, then back at the screen. The animal looking back at me from that photograph, stocky, thick-furred, flat-faced, ancient-looking, with eyes that seemed to carry something heavy in them, was a Pallas's cat, a Manuel, one of the oldest wild cat species on the planet, native to the cold steppes of Central Asia, rarely seen in captivity, and almost never found anywhere near the eastern United States. Dr. Harmon spoke quietly. "I don't know how it ended up on a mountain road in a rainstorm," she said. "But what you brought home is not a house cat." I drove home without the radio on. Milo sat in the passenger seat in his carrier, watching the road ahead, already calm, already settled, already, somehow, exactly where he intended to be. And Cooper, sweet, gentle, oblivious Cooper, was waiting for us at the door. He had no idea what was coming. The thing about a Pallas's cat is that nobody tells you how fast they grow, not in any way you're prepared for. In the first month after the vet visit, Milo was still small enough that I could carry him in one hand. By month 3, that was no longer an option. By month 5, he was solid, dense and low to the ground, built like something that had been engineered over millennia specifically to survive in places where survival wasn't supposed to be possible. His paws got thick, his shoulders filled out. His coat, already unusual, already longer and grayer than any domestic cat I'd ever seen, became something else entirely, something that made people stop mid-sentence when they saw him for the first time. Cooper noticed the change before I did. He started giving Milo more space. Not afraid exactly, more like respectful, the way you give space to someone who hasn't threatened you but whose presence carries a certain weight that you feel before you can explain it. I thought it was funny at the time. I stopped finding it funny around the 6th month. It started with the bed. Cooper's bed, the old green one near the wood stove that he'd had since he was a puppy, had always been sacred territory, not defended, just understood. Even guests who didn't know Cooper somehow sensed it wasn't theirs to sit on. Milo did not sense this. One evening I watched him walk directly across the room, step onto Cooper's bed without hesitation, turn twice, and lie down exactly in the center of it, chin on his paws, eyes half closed, the picture of absolute comfort. Cooper stood 2 feet away and looked at me. I looked at Cooper. Neither of us knew what to do. Cooper slept on the floor that night. He has slept on the floor, beside his own bed, almost every night since. The bed belongs to Milo now. This is simply a fact of life in this house. The socks started disappearing around the same time. I'd find them under the couch, behind the water heater, once, inexplicably, inside a boot in the closet, never chewed, never damaged, just relocated, as if Milo was building a private archive of things that belonged to him now. The television remote went missing for 11 days. I watched 3 evenings of whatever happened to be on when I sat down because I couldn't change the channel. I found the remote eventually behind the washing machine, wedged against the wall with 2 socks and a pen I hadn't seen since February. He figured out cabinet doors in the 7th month. Not all of them, just the ones in the kitchen, specifically the low cabinet where I kept Cooper's treat bag. I came downstairs one morning to find the cabinet open, the treat bag on the floor, and Milo sitting beside it looking not guilty at all. Just waiting, apparently, for me to open the bag properly since he hadn't managed that part yet. Cooper was sitting across the room watching this with an expression I can only describe as resigned. The work calls were their own category of problem. I'm remote, which means my day is built around video meetings, quiet, professional, moderately serious conversations with clients who don't particularly need to see a flat-faced wild cat walk across my keyboard and sit directly in front of my camera with his back to the screen. This happened regularly. The first time I apologized and moved him off the desk. He was back within 40 seconds. The second time, I tried closing the office door. He sat outside it and produced that low mechanical sound, not quite a growl, not quite a call, until I opened it, at which point he walked in, jumped onto the desk and sat down again like a small furry moderator who had concerns about the meeting's direction. My clients started asking about him. One woman in particular, a project manager in Seattle who I'd worked with for years, began every call by asking if Milo was available. She said he had good energy. I didn't know how to explain that he was a Pallas's cat who had claimed my office as a secondary territory, and my keyboard as a preferred resting surface. I just said he was particular. But here's the thing about Milo that the chaos never quite covered. He followed me everywhere. Not in the loud, attention-seeking way of some animals, not performing, not asking for anything obvious. He just appeared. I'd walk into the kitchen and he'd be there, sitting on the counter watching. I'd move to the porch in the evening and within a few minutes he'd be on the railing beside me, looking out at the tree line, completely silent. He never sat in my lap, never initiated contact the way Cooper did, with that full-body enthusiasm that golden retrievers bring to everything. But if I sat still long enough, he would settle nearby, close enough that I could hear him breathing, close enough that I understood, without either of us making a thing of it, that he had decided I was his. Not a companion exactly, something older than that. Something that felt less like affection and more like a choice he'd made and intended to keep. Dr. Harmon had referred me to a wildlife behaviorist in the 3rd month, a man named Dr. Ellison who studied small wild felids and had published work on manual behavior in captivity. He drove out to the cabin one afternoon in the spring and spent 4 hours just watching Milo move through the house. He didn't take many notes, mostly he just observed. When he finally sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've worked with Pallas's cats for 20 years, in sanctuaries, in research environments, in controlled settings where every variable is managed. I have never seen one behave like this with a human." He meant the proximity, the ease, the way Milo moved through the space like it was fully his, not anxious, not reactive, not performing the careful threat assessment that wild felids typically run constantly in unfamiliar environments. "He trusts you," Dr. Ellison said, genuinely. "That's not something you train into an animal like this. That's something they decide." I thought about that for a long time after he left. But decisions, I was learning, work in more than one direction. By the time Milo was fully grown, thick-shouldered and low and ancient-looking, with that flat face and those amber eyes that seemed to be watching something slightly beyond whatever was in front of him, his wildness had grown with him. He still came home every evening, still appeared on the porch railing at dusk, still settled near me when the house went quiet, but he had started watching the tree line differently, longer, more focused. The way he watched it in the mornings especially, sitting at the window with his body completely still and his ears angled forward like he was listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. I told myself it was instinct, normal, nothing to worry about. Then one Thursday morning in October I came downstairs and the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in over a year. Cooper was sitting by the front door, not scratching at it, not whining, just sitting very close to it, his head low, his eyes on the gap at the bottom. I opened the door. The porch was empty. Milo was gone. The first day I told myself he was hunting. Pallas's cats are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk, built for the kind of patient, low-movement stalking that can last hours. Dr. Ellison had told me early on that Milo would always carry those rhythms in him, regardless of how settled he seemed. A night out, maybe 2, wasn't outside the range of normal. I made myself believe that. I fed Cooper, made coffee, sat on the porch in the cold morning air and watched the tree line the way Milo used to watch it, and waited for a shape to appear at the edge of the woods. Nothing came. By the second day the telling myself had stopped working. I walked the trail behind the cabin, the one that cuts north along the ridge before dropping down into the hollow where a creek runs year-round, cold and fast even in dry months. I walked it slowly, checking the soft ground along the edges for prints, scanning the underbrush, stopping every 100 feet or so to just listen. Wind in the upper branches, the creek below, a woodpecker somewhere to the east working at something with steady mechanical patience. No Milo. I walked back to the cabin and stood in the kitchen for a while without doing anything in particular. Cooper followed me from room to room all day. Not his usual loose wandering movement, something tighter. He stayed close to my legs, closer than normal, and every time I stopped he would press his shoulder against my knee and stay there. I put my hand on his head and we stood in the kitchen like that for a long moment, not saying anything, which felt appropriate. By the 4th day I had covered most of the ground I could reasonably cover alone, the North Trail, the fire road to the east, the old logging path that runs along the back of the property before it disappears into the national forest land where I had no business going alone in November without telling someone where I was headed. I called Dr. Ellison. He listened carefully, asked a few questions, and then was quiet in that particular way of his that meant he was choosing his words. "Mammals are solitary and territorial," he said finally, "but they're also ranging animals, especially males, especially in autumn." He paused. "There's a possibility, he said, that he's found something out there, or someone. I understood what he meant. I just wasn't ready to follow the thought all the way to its conclusion. He'll come back, Dr. Ellison said, or he won't. But either way, Jake, either way is him being exactly what he is. I thanked him and sat with the phone in my hand for a while after we hung up. 2 weeks passed. The neighbors, a retired couple named the Hargroves, who lived about a mile down the road and had met Milo twice and been completely unsettled by him both times, asked carefully if everything was all right when they saw me at the hardware store. Word travels in small mountain communities. An unusual animal going missing is the kind of thing people notice. I said I thought he was probably fine. I wasn't sure I believed that. Cooper had stopped waiting by the front door by the end of the 2nd week. He still glanced at it sometimes, that quick hopeful check that dogs do when they haven't stopped expecting something, but he'd moved back to his usual spots, or Milo's spots technically. He'd quietly reclaimed the bed by the wood stove. He slept in it carefully, the way you use something that might still belong to someone else. The house felt different, not empty exactly, but lighter in a way that didn't feel like relief. The evening he came back, I almost missed it. I was at my desk, late, maybe 9 o'clock, finishing up a project that had run long, the lamp on, the wood stove ticking, Cooper asleep on the floor beside my chair, his breathing slow and even. Then Cooper's head came up, not the sharp alert of something alarming, something quieter, recognition. His tail moved once against the floor. I heard it 3 seconds later, a sound at the front door, not frantic, not loud, a single deliberate scratch, low on the wood, the way you'd knock if you wanted to be let in but didn't want to make a scene about it. I was across the room before I'd made a conscious decision to move. He was standing on the porch in the dark. The motion light had come on and he was sitting just inside the edge of it, looking up at me with those flat amber eyes. His coat was full of forest, leaves caught in the long fur, a streak of dried mud along his left shoulder, the clean cold smell of outside coming off him in the night air. He looked, as far as I could tell, completely fine, better than fine. He looked settled in a way that was different from before, heavier somehow, like something had been resolved out there in the dark and the trees and he'd come back carrying the answer. He walked past my legs into the house without ceremony. Cooper met him in the hallway. They touched noses, just briefly, just once, and then Milo walked to the wood stove and sat down in front of it, and began grooming the mud from his shoulder with the focused patience of someone who had things to attend to, and intended to attend to them. I closed the door, stood there for a moment. Then I went and sat on the floor near the wood stove, close but not crowding him, the way I'd learned in the first months, giving him the space to decide. After a few minutes he shifted, leaned his weight slightly toward me, not against me, just toward. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 2 weeks. He disappeared again 10 days later, 3 days that time, then back, then gone for 5, then back by the following Tuesday, smelling of cold rock and pine resin and something I couldn't identify, eating his dinner with that same low-focused intensity and then settling by the stove like none of it required explanation, because to him it didn't. Dr. Ellison drove out again in December. He walked the North Trail with me in the early morning, both of us quiet, watching the ground. He found what he was looking for about a quarter mile in, a set of tracks in the frost-stiffened mud along the creek bank, smaller than Milo's, lighter, the particular round compact print of another Pallas's cat. He crouched beside them for a long time. "Female," he said, "young adult. She's been using this corridor regularly." He looked up at me. "He's not lost out there, Jake. He's living out there, part of the time." I looked at the tracks. Small and precise in the frost, headed north. "Can they survive here?" I asked. "Long term?" "The habitat is better than you'd think," he said. "The elevation, the prey base, the cover." He stood up. "The question isn't really whether he can survive out there." He looked at me steadily. "The question is which world he's going to choose." I thought about that every morning for the next 3 weeks. Every time I came downstairs and found him by the stove, I felt something that was equal parts relief and guilt. Relief that he was here, guilt that I wanted him to stay, guilt that wanting that meant wanting him to be less than what he was. He was a wild animal. He had always been a wild animal. The fact that he'd chosen this house, this dog, this person, didn't change what lived underneath all of it. And yet, he came back, every time. He came back and he sat near me, and he touched noses with Cooper, and he reclaimed his spot on the dog bed, like a landlord checking on a property. He came back and settled and stayed for days at a stretch, watching the tree line from his window post in the mornings, then turning from the glass and walking to the kitchen to wait beside his bowl with that flat, expectant stare. Both things were true at once, wild, and here, fully both. Dr. Ellison had said it and I'd heard it, but I hadn't understood it until I was standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning in January, watching Milo eat his breakfast while snow fell slowly past the window behind him. He wasn't choosing between two worlds. He was building one world out of both. I just hadn't understood yet that I wasn't the one who got to define the terms. He left again on a Thursday. The snow was heavier that time, the real deep winter kind that softens every sound and makes the forest go very still. He was gone from the porch when I woke up. Just his prints leading off the steps and across the yard and into the white. Cooper and I ate breakfast together, watched the snow, waited. He came back 4 days later. He wasn't alone. He stood at the edge of the porch light with something held carefully in his mouth, set it down on the welcome mat with great deliberateness, and looked up at me. I looked down at what he'd brought, and the entire shape of the next chapter of my life quietly rearranged itself. He had brought a kitten, one single tiny kitten, set down on the welcome mat with the careful precision of something transported a long distance and delivered with intention, gray-furred, thick even at that size. Eyes not fully open yet, that cloudy pale blue of the newly born, blinking slowly in the porch light. Milo sat beside it and looked up at me, not asking exactly, not performing, just presenting a fact and waiting for me to understand it. Behind him, at the very edge of the light where the dark began, something else was there, low to the ground, still, a pair of amber eyes catching the light for just a moment before they disappeared back into the shadow of the tree line. The female. She didn't come closer. She wasn't ready for that. But she had come this far, which I understood. Even then, even standing in the cold in my socks on a January night, was not a small thing. I picked up the kitten. It fit in my palm. Warm and dense and trembling slightly, that fine trembling of something very young that hasn't yet learned to regulate its own temperature. I held it against my chest the way I'd held Milo on a mountain road in a rainstorm 3 years before, and something moved through me that I didn't have a clean word for. Milo watched me hold it. Then he walked past my legs into the house. Cooper was in the hallway. He saw the kitten in my hands and went completely still, the same freeze he'd done 3 years ago on a kitchen floor when a soaked half-dead ball of fur had looked up at him with ancient amber eyes, older now, grayer around the muzzle, a little slower getting up in the mornings. But still Cooper, still that open, available, endlessly patient heart in a golden coat. He leaned forward and touched his nose to the kitten very gently. The kitten turned toward the warmth of his breath. Cooper looked up at me with an expression I had seen before, that particular golden retriever look that contains, somehow, both total bewilderment and complete acceptance simultaneously. I laughed for the first time in weeks. That first kitten was followed by 2 more within the next 48 hours, not brought all at once. Milo transported them one at a time, each trip made with the same focused deliberateness, each kitten set down on the same spot on the welcome mat like he had decided that was the delivery point and saw no reason to vary the procedure. The female moved closer each time. By the 3rd delivery she was sitting at the bottom of the porch steps, watching the door, watching me, running whatever calculation wild things run when they are deciding whether a space is safe enough to risk. I did not go to her. I had learned enough from Milo to understand that approach was the wrong direction. I left food at the bottom of the steps and went back inside and watched through the window. She ate without coming closer. Then she sat in the yard for a long time, looking at the house, the lit windows, the shapes of us moving inside. Then she was gone. But she came back the next evening, and the evening after that. I called Dr. Ellison the morning after the 3rd kitten arrived. He was quiet for a long moment on the phone, and then he made a sound that I think, from a 20-year veteran wildlife behaviorist, constituted losing composure. He brought them to you, he said. He did. To the house, to the welcome mat specifically. Another silence. Jake, he said carefully, I want you to understand that what you're describing is not documented behavior. What you're describing is, he stopped, started again. He made a choice about where his family would be safe, and that choice was you. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and looked at Milo, who was sitting on the counter watching the 3 kittens navigate the kitchen floor with the wobbling, overcorrecting movement of animals who had not yet fully negotiated their relationship with gravity. He looked entirely unsurprised by all of it. The kittens were chaos in a form I had not previously imagined possible. 3 of them, each about the size of a large potato, each operating with the full focused intensity of a wild predator in a body that had not yet developed the physical capacity to back up that intensity. They fell off things constantly and immediately tried to climb them again. They attacked each other with great seriousness and then fell asleep in a pile mid-conflict. They discovered Cooper on the second day and determined collectively that he was a climbing structure. Cooper bore this with a dignity that moved me genuinely. He would be lying on the floor and a kitten would simply begin ascending his back leg, hauling itself upward with those thick little paws, and Cooper would lift his head and look at me with an expression of profound patience while the kitten crested his shoulder and sat there, surveying the room from its new elevation, deeply satisfied. By the end of the first week, all 3 kittens were sleeping on Cooper regularly, on his back, between his front legs, tucked under his chin. He had become, without anyone asking him or consulting him on the matter, the primary sleeping surface of the next generation of Pallas's cats. He accepted this. He accepted everything. He had always accepted everything. He was Cooper. Milo's behavior shifted in those first weeks in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. He moved through the house differently, more deliberate, more present, constantly running a quiet inventory of where the kittens were and what they were doing. When one of them wandered too close to the wood stove, he was there before I was, stepping between kitten and heat with calm authority. When the smallest one, a female, slightly lighter in color than her brothers, got herself wedged behind the washing machine and began producing a small alarm sound, Milo was at the gap in seconds, lying flat, reaching one thick paw into the dark to give her something to follow back out. He was not demonstrative about any of it, no different in the way he carried himself, no softening of that flat ancient expression, but he was there, constantly, quietly there, present in a way that had weight to it. I watched him one evening from the doorway of the kitchen. He was sitting in the middle of the floor with all 3 kittens orbiting him in various states of chaos, one climbing his tail, one batting at his ear, one simply walking directly over his face, and he was still, patient, enduring it all with the steady composure of something that has decided where it belongs and no longer finds that decision complicated. I thought about a mountain road in a rainstorm, a tiny soaked animal that didn't struggle when I picked it up. The female came inside for the first time on a Wednesday evening in early February. I didn't make anything of it, didn't move toward her, didn't speak, kept my eyes on the book in my lap and let her take the room at whatever pace she needed. She came through the door that Milo had pushed open, stopped just inside the threshold, and spent a long time simply standing there, reading the space, reading me. Cooper lifted his head from the floor, registered her presence, and put his head back down, which was, I realized, the correct thing. The most reassuring thing. An animal that large choosing to be unbothered is its own kind of message. She moved along the wall, slow and low, checked the corners, found the kittens asleep in their pile near the stove, and stood over them for a moment, and something in her posture changed, not relaxed exactly, but settled, confirmed. She didn't stay long that first night, an hour, maybe less, but she came back the next evening, and the one after that. By the end of February she had a place she preferred, the high shelf in my office, the one Milo had claimed in the first month, where she could see every entrance and exit and the whole yard through the window. She wasn't tame, she didn't want to be touched. But she was there, and her being there meant something that didn't need to be translated. This was home now, for all of them. Spring came slow that year. The snow came off the mountain in stages, the yard going from white to gray to the first pale showing of last year's grass underneath. The kittens discovered the outdoors with a ferocity that required daily monitoring. Milo supervised their early expeditions with the same quiet authority he'd brought to everything else, letting them range but appearing at the edge of any distance that concerned him, his presence alone enough to redirect. They were growing fast, the way he'd grown, dense and deliberate and more themselves with every week. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch and watch the whole family move through the yard in the last of the light, Milo and the female ranging the perimeter in their slow, patient way, the kittens exploding through the grass in short, intense bursts, practicing things they didn't fully know they were practicing yet, Cooper moving through all of it like a slow, warm current, unhurried, belonging to the scene in the way that certain presences just belong. I had not planned any of this. I had stopped on a mountain road because something moved. That was the whole of my contribution to the arrangement. Everything after that had been Milo's decision, made quietly and completely, revised and deepened over 3 years until it had become something I didn't have a category for. Not rescue, not adoption, not ownership, something older than all of those words. One evening in late April, I came in from the porch and found them all in the living room, Cooper on the floor near the stove, asleep on his side in that total way old dogs sleep, 3 kittens distributed across him in various configurations. The female on her shelf, visible in the low light, watching the room with those steady amber eyes, Milo on the arm of the couch beside my chair, which was where he'd taken to sitting in the evenings, not on my lap, never quite that, but beside me, close enough. I sat down. He leaned slightly toward me, that small familiar lean. Outside the window the last of the light was going out of the sky over the ridge. The wood stove ticked. Cooper breathed. One of the kittens shifted in its sleep and resettled against the warmth of the dog's side. I sat in that room for a long time without moving, thinking about a night 3 years ago, the rain so heavy I almost didn't stop, the shape beside the road that could have been anything, the animal that pressed its face against my chest in the dark and went still like it had already made its decision. Maybe it had. Maybe the whole of it. Milo, Cooper, the female at the edge of the porch light, 3 kittens asleep on a golden retriever on a spring evening in the mountains. Maybe all of it was set in motion in that moment on the road. Not by me, by him. I thought I stopped to rescue something helpless. What I actually did was get chosen. By a wild thing that knew, somehow, exactly what it was doing. He rules the dog. He runs the house. He brought his whole family to my door and waited for me to understand that this was the arrangement now. And somewhere along the way, I couldn't tell you exactly when, I stopped thinking of it as his world expanding into mine. I started understanding it as mine expanding into his. That's a different thing. That's a much better thing.